In the unforgiving frontier of 1880s Wyoming, Sarah Miller steps off the train with nothing but hope and a single carpetbag, a mail-order bride seeking her promised future. But the welcoming family she expected turns out to be swindlers who rob her of everything, even her mother's locket, her last connection to home. Left penniless and alone, she wanders the dusty road until exhaustion claims her. That's where Thomas Crawford, a widowed rancher still wrestling with his own grief, finds her. His struggling ranch needs help, and in Sarah's quiet determination, he sees something familiar, a reflection of his own resilience. As autumn paints the prairie gold, Sarah's gentle ways begin to heal more than just the ranch's worn fences. But with winter approaching and secrets from her past threatening to resurface, will Sarah find the courage to trust again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Steam billowed across the wooden platform as Sarah Miller smoothed her travel-worn skirts, gripping her carpetbag with trembling fingers. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Creek Station, its weathered boards speaking of a town still finding its footing in the Wyoming Territory. She pulled the wrinkled letter from her pocket, the paper soft from countless readings during the long journey from Boston. "You'll find a loving Christian home here," James Henderson had written. "My wife Mary and I have a fine house in town, and our congregation needs a school teacher desperately. We'll see you properly settled, just as if you were our own daughter." Sarah touched the locket at her throat, its familiar weight offering comfort. Inside lay the last picture of her mother, taken just months before the consumption claimed her. "Trust in God's plan," her mother had always said. After losing both parents and watching Boston schools fill their teaching positions with returning war widows, that trust had led Sarah to answer the Hendersons' advertisement. The station door creaked open, and Sarah straightened her spine. A couple emerged. The woman short and round, the man tall and angular, both wearing clothes that had seen better days. Something in their eager smiles made Sarah's stomach tighten. "Miss Miller?" The woman hurried forward, arms outstretched. "I'm Mary Henderson, and this is my James. Oh, look at you, just as pretty as your daguerreotype showed." Sarah accepted the embrace, noting how Mary's perfume couldn't quite mask other, less pleasant odors. James Henderson's handshake was a touch too firm, his eyes lingering a moment too long on her face. "We've got the buggy waiting," Mary chirped, already reaching for Sarah's carpetbag. "You must be exhausted, poor dear. We'll have you home and settled in no time." As they led her to a weathered buggy, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The Hendersons' letter had described a fine house and prosperous congregation, yet their clothes were shabby, their buggy's leather cracked and mended. "The school's just lovely," Mary chattered as they drove. "Such sweet children, all eager to learn, though of course you'll need proper clothes before you can start teaching. Something more suitable for our little town." Sarah clutched her mother's locket, its familiar shape grounding her as doubt crept in. She'd traded her life savings for this chance at a new beginning. "Please, Lord," she prayed silently, "let this be the right path." The buggy turned away from the town's more prosperous streets, heading toward the rougher edges where weather-beaten shacks hunched against the wind. Sarah's chest tightened as James Henderson flicked the reins, urging the horse faster. This wasn't the path to any fine house. This wasn't the start of any dream. This, Sarah realized with growing dread, was the beginning of a nightmare. The shacks. Door groaned open to reveal a single room, bare except for a stained mattress and a rough wooden table. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as Mary Henderson's friendly mask crumbled away. "Well, ain't you the proper little lady?" Mary's voice had lost its sugary warmth. "James, check her bag. These Boston types always pack something valuable." "Please," Sarah whispered, backing away. "There's been a mistake. I should—" James grabbed her carpetbag, dumping its contents onto the dirty floor. Her carefully packed dresses, her mother's Bible, her small savings of carefully hoarded dollars, all scattered like autumn leaves in a harsh wind. "Mistake?" he laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Only mistake was you being fool enough to believe our letters. How many times we used that schoolteacher story now, Mary? 6? 7? 8, Mary corrected, her fingers suddenly at Sarah's throat. "And this one's wearing real silver. My, quite the prize." The locket's chain snapped. Sarah lunged for it, but Mary danced away, already working the clasp. The precious photograph of her mother fluttered to the floor, where James's mud-caked boot came down upon it. "No!" The cry tore from Sarah's throat. "Please, not that. It's all I have left of her. Should have stayed in Boston then, shouldn't you?" Mary tucked the locket into her bodice. "James, get her ring too. Sterling silver, if I don't miss my guess." Sarah backed toward the door, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Trust in God's plan. But what plan could there be in this? What? Divine purpose in such cruelty? "Now don't go getting any ideas about running to the sheriff," James warned, twisting Sarah's arm until she cried out. "Folk around here know us. Respectable church-going family we are. Who'd believe some strange woman's wild tales? They took everything, her money, her mother's Bible, even her spare boots, left her only the dress she wore and a single handkerchief that had fallen beneath the table. "Best start walking, Miss Miller." Mary smirked, dropping Sarah's empty carpetbag at her feet. "Long way to anywhere from here, and mind you don't come back to Copper Creek. Might not be so gentle next time." The door slammed behind them. Sarah heard the buggy wheels crunch away through the autumn leaves, carrying the last pieces of her old life. She sank to her knees beside the ruined photograph, tears blurring her vision as she traced her mother's faded features. Night was falling. The October wind keened through the shack's broken window, carrying winter's first bitter promise. Sarah gathered the photograph's fragments and tucked them into her bodice, next to her heart. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and stepped out into the gathering dark. She had no idea which direction led to safety, no idea how far she might have to walk before finding help, but she was her mother's daughter, and Miller women didn't give up, even when the path ahead seemed impossible, even when all hope seemed lost, one foot in front of the other. One step at a time, away from Copper Creek and its false promises, away from the Hendersons and their practiced cruelty, into a darkness that surely, somehow, must give way to dawn. Thomas Crawford's morning began the way it had for the past 3 years, with the weight of silence. Dawn painted his bedroom walls gold, catching the simple gold band that lay on the bedside table, Rebecca's ring. He'd stopped wearing his own months ago, but couldn't bring himself to move hers from where she'd left it that last morning. "Just for a moment while I knead the bread," she'd said, laughing. "Don't want to get flour in the settings again." But the bread had never been finished. The fever had taken her before sunset, leaving nothing but memories and a ring that caught the morning light like a promise unfulfilled. He swung his legs over the bed's edge, boots scuffing the unswept floor. The house felt wrong without Rebecca's touches. Curtains she'd sewn now gathering dust, her gardens overtaken by weeds. Some days he could almost hear her scolding him for letting it all go. The mirror showed him what 3 years of grief had wrought, grey threading his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes. At 45, he felt ancient some mornings, especially when the autumn chill crept into his bones. Outside, the ranch stretched away toward the mountains, everything touched by frost. 3,000 acres, and every inch of it demanding attention. The barn needed new shingles before winter. The north pasture fence had holes big enough for calves to wander through. The list grew longer every day, while his ability to manage, it all seemed to shrink. "You're burning daylight, old man," he muttered, Rebecca's favorite saying coming to his lips unbidden. She'd always been the one to keep him moving, to remind him that work was the best medicine for a troubled heart. The coffee was bitter and too strong, but it got him moving. First the chickens, then the horses. Old Duke, his best working horse, nickered a greeting. The gelding had been Rebecca's favorite, gentler than any horse had a right to be. Now he seemed to share Thomas's quiet grief, his movements slower, more deliberate. "Another day, old friend," Thomas patted Duke's neck. "Just got to keep moving forward." His neighbor Jim Parker had offered to help, even suggested sending his boy over to do the heavy work. But Thomas couldn't accept. The ranch had been his dream, his and Rebecca's. They'd built it together from nothing but hope and hard work. Letting others step in felt too much like admitting defeat. The morning passed in a blur of familiar tasks. Mending tack, checking the cattle in the south pasture, adding another item to his mental list of urgent repairs. The windmill's creak kept time like a metronome, marking hours that felt increasingly empty. Mid-morning found him at Rebecca's grave, on the small hill overlooking the house. He'd planted wildflowers there that first spring, but they hadn't taken. Just another failure in a growing list. "I'm trying, Becca," he said to the quiet air. "Lord knows I'm trying, but some days—" He trailed off, watching a hawk circle overhead. She'd loved watching the hawks, always said they reminded her that God's eye was on every creature, no matter how small or lost. The wedding ring in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. He'd taken to carrying it with him, though he couldn't say why. Maybe because leaving it in that empty house felt like abandoning her memory. Or maybe because its weight reminded him that he'd once known how to love something more than his own solitude. A distant rumble of thunder drew his attention. Westward, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising an early taste of winter. He'd need to check the creek crossing before the rain hit, make sure no debris had gathered that might cause flooding. Burning daylight, he reminded himself, turning away from the grave. But Rebecca's voice seemed to follow him down the hill, carrying a whisper of the joy that had once filled these acres. Sometimes he wondered if he'd forgotten how to hear it, or if he'd simply stopped listening. Duke stamped impatiently as Thomas saddled him, eager to be moving. At least someone still had purpose, still knew their path forward. Thomas swung into the saddle, feeling every one of his years in the movement. "Right then, old boy. Let's see what trouble we can head off before that storm hits." But as they rode toward the creek, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was the storm coming in, or maybe just his mind playing tricks. Either way, the day suddenly felt different, heavier with possibility than any morning had in 3 long years. The creek crossing was clear, but Thomas took his time riding back, letting Duke pick his way along the rain-slicked trail. The storm had passed quickly, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the clearing sky and air that smelled of wet sage and coming winter. He almost missed her at first, just a dark shape against the muddy road's edge. Could have been a fallen branch or someone's lost bundle. But Duke's ears pricked forward, and the horse slowed without being asked. A woman lay crumpled beside her carpet bag, her dress soaked through with rain and mud. For a moment, Thomas considered riding on. Troubled folk were best left to the towns. Charity, Rebecca would have... No. Rebecca would have stopped, would have helped without hesitation. He dismounted, boots squelching in the mud. "Ma'am, you all right there?" She didn't stir. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her skin felt cold when he checked for a pulse, but it was there, steady under his fingers. The carpet bag beside her was expensive leather gone to ruin, its brass fittings tarnished and one handle hanging loose, almost empty when he lifted it, containing only a ruined photograph and a muddy handkerchief. "Ma'am?" He touched her shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, fever bright in her pale face. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me." The words hit him like a physical blow. What had happened to put that fear in her voice? "No one's going to hurt you. I'm Thomas Crawford. My ranch is just over that rise. Can you tell me your name?" She tried to sit up, fell back. Sarah Miller. I was supposed to teach." Her voice faded as consciousness slipped. Away again. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching. Thomas looked toward town, then back at the woman. Copper Creek was a good 10 miles away, and the doctor might not even be in. His ranch was closer, and he had basic medical supplies. Rebecca had insisted on keeping a well-stocked medicine chest. Still, taking in a stranger, a woman alone, went against every habit of his solitary life. People would talk. They already whispered about poor Mr. Crawford and his inability to move forward. This would give them more fuel for their gossip. Sarah stirred again, a small sound of pain escaping her lips. The bruise on her wrist told its own story, dark against her pale skin. "Damn it all," Thomas muttered. He couldn't leave her here, and he knew it. Rebecca would never have forgiven him. Getting her onto Duke was a challenge. She was lighter than she should have been, but managing an unconscious woman and a nervous horse took all his strength and patience. Finally, he had her settled in. Front of him, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Easy now, Duke," he soothed as the horse danced sideways. "Let's get her somewhere warm." The sky darkened as they rode, wind picking up with the promise of worse weather to come. Sarah mumbled something about a locket about her mother, but the words were lost in the rising wind. Thomas found himself talking to her, the way he used to talk to Rebecca during long rides. Almost there now, got a good fire going in the kitchen stove, and some of yesterday's soup to warm up. Rebecca always said hot soup could cure most anything. He paused, surprised by how naturally her name had come to his lips. He'd avoided speaking it aloud for so long, as if saying it might make the loss feel fresh again. But somehow, with this unconscious stranger sharing his horse, the name felt right. Like Rebecca was watching, approving of this break in his solitude. The ranch house came into view just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Thomas looked down at Sarah's face, peaceful now, despite the fever's flush. "Well, Miss Miller," he said softly, "welcome to Crawford Ranch, though I suspect neither of us knows quite what we're getting into here." Duke picked up his pace as the rain began in earnest, carrying them toward the house that had stood empty of all but memories for far too long. Sarah woke to unfamiliar shadows and the scent of coffee. Sunlight filtered through faded curtains, illuminating a simple room with worn but clean furnishings. Her fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving behind a hollow clarity and the memory of gentle hands pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Moving carefully, she sat up. Someone had removed her mud-caked dress and boots, leaving her in her undergarments and wrapped in a warm quilt. A fresh dress, plain but clean, lay folded on a nearby chair. The events of yesterday crashed back, the Hendersons, her mother's locket, wandering lost in the rain. Then a man's voice, a horse's steady gait, and finally, blessed darkness. The dress fit poorly, clearly made for someone taller, but it was better than her ruined clothing. She found her boots by the door, cleaned of mud and carefully dried. The simple kindness of that gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Voices drifted up from below, a man talking to his animals as he did morning chores. Sarah crept to the window. Thomas Crawford moved between the barn and chicken coop with practiced efficiency, his routine evidently unchanged by the presence of an unexpected guest. The house itself told a different story. Dust lay thick on the hallway furniture. Curtains hung askew, and the kitchen showed signs of a bachelor's neglect. Yet there were touches of a woman's hand everywhere. Embroidered cushions gone dingy, carefully arranged shelves now scattered with male detritus, a line of hooks that once must have held bonnets and aprons now bearing only a single battered hat. On the kitchen table, she found coffee keeping warm by the stove, and a plate of biscuits that had seen better days. Beside them lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages dog-eared and stained. Unable to resist the teacher in her soul, Sarah opened it. The neat columns told a story of their own. Cattle prices falling, feed costs rising, equipment repairs mounting. The latest entry in a harsh scrawl: North fence, 200 feet replacement needed before winter. No funds. Didn't mean to leave you alone. Thomas's voice from the doorway made her jump. Didn't seem right to wake you after the night you had. I'm sorry, Sarah gestured to the ledger. I shouldn't have pried. No matter. Numbers tell their own truth, don't they? He poured coffee into 2 cups, handed her one. Guess you can see why I'm not keeping a housekeeper these days. The bitterness in his voice sparked something in Sarah, a teacher's instinct to correct, to help. Mr. Crawford. Thomas. I may not have much, but I do have my health and my gratitude. Let me earn my keep, at least until I can make other arrangements. He studied her over his coffee cup, eyes dark with consideration. The Hendersons did this to you? Sarah's hands tightened on her cup. You know them? Know of them. They've done this before, though most victims don't make it this far from town. He paused. Sheriff's a friend of theirs, I hear. I have nowhere else to go, Sarah admitted. The words tasted of ash and failure. Thomas set his cup down carefully. Ranch needs attention, I can't give it alone. House too, but it's hard work. Miss Miller, and I'm not an easy man to live with these days, Sarah. And I'm not asking for charity, just a chance to work, to rebuild. She met his eyes steadily. I may look delicate, Mr. Crawford, but I'm stronger than I appear. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, of a fellow survivor. We'll try it for a week, see how it suits us both. He stood, reached for his hat. There's breakfast things in the pantry, if you've a mind to cook. I need to check the north pasture. At the door, he paused. My wife, Rebecca, she'd have wanted someone to help you, but she'd also want you to know you can leave any time, no obligations. Sarah watched him stride toward the barn, his shoulders set against more than just the morning cold. Looking around the kitchen, at the ledger's worrying numbers, the dusty windows, the lingering traces of Rebecca's touch, she squared her shoulders and reached for an apron hanging forgotten on its peg. 1 week to prove herself. 1 week to begin again. She could work with that. Days fell into a rhythm at Crawford Ranch. Sarah rose before dawn, starting fires and preparing breakfast, while Thomas tended the animals. They rarely spoke during these early hours, but the silence grew comfortable, like a warm shawl wrapped around tired shoulders. It was while searching the pantry's highest shelf for cornmeal that Sarah found the book. Leather-bound and well-worn, it fell open to reveal pages covered in delicate handwriting. Recipes, she realized, hundreds of them, each annotated with personal notes. Thomas likes this with extra pepper, one margin note read. Perfect for winter evenings, said another. Made this the day he proposed. Had to write it down while my hands were still shaking with joy. Sarah closed the book quickly, feeling like an intruder. But the ghost of Rebecca Crawford seemed to linger in these pages, in the carefully recorded measurements and loving observations. That was hers. Thomas's voice from the doorway made her start. Used to say a recipe wasn't worth keeping if you didn't write down what made it special. I'm sorry, I was just looking for... Keep it. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. Been gathering dust up there too long. Rebecca would have... He stopped. Cleared his throat. She would have wanted it used. Sarah traced the book's worn spine. Tell me about her. The question hung in the air like morning mist. Thomas moved to the stove, poured coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. She could grow anything, he said finally. Had a way with plants that seemed like magic. That herb garden out back used to be her pride and joy. Everything she cooked had something from it. Sarah glanced through the window at the overgrown plot. I could clear it, she offered carefully. If you'd like. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed. Might be good, winter's coming, could dry some herbs for storing. They worked together that morning, Sarah following Rebecca's detailed notes on preserving sage and rosemary. Thomas brought in fresh-cut herbs, sharing small stories with each bundle. How Rebecca had nursed these plants through drought years. How she'd traded cuttings with neighboring farms, how the lavender had been a wedding gift from her mother. She kept this place alive, he admitted, watching Sarah hang herb bundles from the kitchen rafters. Not just the garden, everything. Had a knack for seeing what needed doing before it became a problem. Like the north fence, Sarah ventured. A shadow crossed his face. Yeah, She'd have had me fixing that months ago, wouldn't have let things slide this far. Sarah opened the recipe book again, found a page marked Thomas's favorite stew. We could make this, she suggested, while the herbs are drying. He studied the page over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Haven't had that since, well, been a while. Then it's time. Sarah began gathering ingredients, following Rebecca's precise instructions. She was very thorough in her notes. That was Rebecca. Said cooking was like love. Had to pay attention to the details. The stew simmered all afternoon, filling the house with memories. Sarah caught Thomas pausing in his work to breathe in the familiar scent, saw how his eyes softened when she served it in the blue bowls Rebecca's notes had specified. Tastes just like... He stopped, swallowed hard. Thank you. Later. After. Dishes were done and evening chores completed. Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Rebecca's book. Beyond its recipes lay a map of love, a woman's careful building of home and family, her attention to the small things that made a house feel lived in, a marriage feel cherished. I'll try to honor your care, Sarah whispered to the pages. To tend what you planted here. Outside, Thomas's voice drifted through the window as he talked to his horses in the gathering dusk. Sarah smiled, adding her own note beneath Rebecca's stew recipe. Made this on a fall day when the kitchen needed. Memories, the herbs came from your garden which is growing again. The first frost came early that year, painting the prairie grass silver and forcing them to confront the north fence sooner than planned. Sarah watched Thomas test each post, marking the worst with red cloth strips that fluttered like warning flags in the October wind. Woods rotted clean through, he muttered, rocking a post that swayed dangerously. Should have replaced these last spring. Sarah ran her hand along the weathered wood. How many need replacing? 20, maybe 30. He squinted at the horizon. More than I can manage alone before winter. Then it's fortunate you're not alone. Sarah lifted the heavy maul from the wagon, testing its weight. Show me what to do. He studied her for a long moment. This isn't light work. Neither was teaching 30 children in a one-room schoolhouse. She met his gaze steadily. I'm stronger than I look, remember? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That you are. He took the maul gently from her hands. Watch first. There's a rhythm to it. The morning passed in a blur of shared labor. Thomas demonstrated the proper technique for setting posts, and Sarah proved a quick study. Her first attempts were awkward, but by midday she'd found the rhythm he'd spoken of, the careful measuring, the solid thunk of the maul driving posts. Home, the satisfaction of seeing each section completed. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by necessary words and the distant cry of geese heading south. Sarah's hands blistered and her muscles burned, but she welcomed the pain. Each post set felt like driving down her own roots, claiming a place in this harsh but beautiful land. During their noon break, Thomas passed her his canteen. You're doing well. The posts or the cooking? Both. He gestured at the new section of fence. Most folks wouldn't have stuck it out this long. Ranch life's not easy. Neither is starting. Over. Sarah sipped the water, watching a hawk circle overhead. But sometimes the hard path is the right one. Thomas nodded slowly. Rebecca used to say that, called it character building when things got rough. He pulled something from his pocket, a smooth stone, worn from handling. She found this. The day we bought the ranch, said it was a sign we were meant to be here. And do you still believe that? Believed in her. He turned the stone over in his hands. Rest sort of followed naturally. They returned to work as clouds gathered in the west. Sarah's arms trembled with exhaustion, but she pressed on, matching Thomas post for post. When the first raindrops fell, they'd completed nearly 30 feet of new fence. Storm's coming, Thomas observed, loading tools into the wagon. But we made good progress. Sarah nodded, too tired for words. Her hands were raw despite the work gloves he'd lent her, and every muscle screamed protest. But looking at the straight line of new posts running north, she felt a fierce pride. That evening, after a simple supper of Rebecca's beef stew, Sarah soaked her hands in cool water while Thomas dressed the worst blisters. His touch was gentle, impersonal as a doctor's, but she found herself watching his face in the lamplight. "They'll toughen up," he said, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around her palm. "Hands know what they're meant for, given time. Like hearts." The words slipped out before she could catch them. His hands stilled for a moment. "Maybe so." He tied off the bandage carefully. "Rest tomorrow. Give these a chance to heal. There's too much work." "There's always too much work." His voice held a hint of amusement. "That's ranch life. But you've proved your point, Sarah. You belong here as much as any of us." The words settled over her like a warm blanket. Belong. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. Later, lying in bed, Sarah listened to the rain drum against the roof and thought about belonging, about fence posts driven deep into prairie soil, about hands that could learn new work and hearts that could learn new rhythms. Outside her window, the new fence posts stood straight and strong against the storm, marking a boundary that felt more like a beginning. Sarah was gathering eggs when she heard the wagon approach. Thomas had ridden into town for supplies, and the sound of wheels on the packed earth announced his return. But something in the set of his shoulders as he drove into the yard made her pause, basket half full against her hip. "Sarah?" He climbed down slowly, holding a folded newspaper. "Think you should see this." The Copper Creek Weekly was 2 days old, its pages already yellowing. There, in the bottom corner of the second page, sat a notice that made her blood run cold. "Caution to citizens. Be aware of a woman calling herself Sarah Miller, claiming to be a school teacher from Boston. This confidence artist has been seen in several territories, working with known criminals. Any information regarding her whereabouts should be reported to Sheriff James Henderson." Her legs weakened. Thomas caught her elbow, steadying her as the egg basket slipped from nerveless fingers. "They're trying to discredit me," she whispered, "in case I talk about what they did." Figured as much. Thomas's voice was carefully neutral. "Want to tell me the truth of it?" Sarah looked up at him, seeing no judgment in his weathered face. "I am a teacher. Was a teacher. Everything I told you about Boston was true." She drew a shaky breath. "But there's more." He nodded toward the kitchen. "Better tell it over coffee." Inside, while Thomas stoked the stove and set water to boil, Sarah forced herself to face the memories she'd been running from. "I answered their advertisement in good faith," she began, "but they weren't the first family I'd written to. There was another position in Nebraska Territory. The family seemed perfect in their letters. A widower with 3 children needing a governess." Thomas set a steaming cup before her. But when I arrived, I found an empty homestead and a gang of thieves waiting. They'd killed the real family months before, been using their identity to lure women out. Her hands trembled around the cup. "I escaped before they could, before anything happened. Reported it to the territorial marshal, and they were caught." Sarah nodded. 2 hanged, but their friends swore revenge. Said they'd find me someday. She met Thomas's eyes. "That's why I came so far west. Why I was desperate enough to trust the Hendersons without proper references." Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the tick of the old clock and the distant lowing of cattle. Thomas stood, paced to the window, then back. "Sheriff's in their pocket," he said finally. "But Marshal Evans over in Cheyenne. He's honest. Could ride out there, tell him what happened." "No!" The word burst from her. "Please, I can't face another courtroom, more men questioning my story, my character." She fought to steady her voice. "I'll leave tonight. You've been kind, but I won't bring trouble to your door." "Like hell you will." The quiet force in his voice stopped her. "You think I care what those vultures print? I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion fixing my fences, seen you bring life back to Rebecca's garden, tasted the meals you cook from her recipes." He laid his hand on the table, fingers spread. "You belong here, Sarah Miller, unless you want to leave." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't. God help me, I don't want to leave." "Then we'll face it together." He pulled a chair close, sat facing her, But no more running. Running just tells them they have power over you. Sarah wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. The townspeople will talk. Let them. Truth has a way of coming out. He touched the newspaper gently. Henderson's made a mistake. Publishing this gives us proof of their scheme. Us? The word felt fragile as new ice. Us? Thomas's voice held the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. About time you accepted that. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains, promising early snow. But in the warm kitchen, Sarah felt something shift inside her, like a wound finally beginning to heal, or a bird finding its way home after a long winter. She reached across the table, laid her hand beside his, not touching, but close enough to share warmth. "Tell me what we do next," she said softly. And as Thomas began to outline their plan, Sarah realized she was no longer watching the road for chances to flee. For the first time since Boston, she was ready to stand her ground. The letter arrived with the first snow, carried by Jim Parker's boy, who'd been to town for supplies. Thomas recognized the marshal's seal before he even broke the wax. "Came express from Cheyenne," young Billy explained, stomping snow from his boots. Pa said it looked important. Inside, Sarah was kneading bread, her hands strong and sure in the morning light. She'd grown more confident in Rebecca's kitchen, adding her own touches to the old recipes. But her fingers stilled when she saw the envelope in Thomas's hands. "Marshal Evans wrote back," he said quietly, once Billy had gone. "Seems we weren't the only ones making inquiries about the Hendersons." The letter contained a second paper. Wanted poster that made Sarah sink into a kitchen chair. There, in stark black ink, were Mary and James Henderson's faces, along with a list of aliases and known crimes that covered half the page. 7 women, Sarah whispered, reading. 7 others before me, all across the territories. Her voice. Caught. 2 didn't survive. Thomas laid the poster on the table between them. Marshall's been building a case for months. Seems the Hendersons didn't just work Copper Creek. They'd move on when suspicions grew, set up the same scheme in new towns. All those women, all those lives they ruined. Sarah traced the list of aliases with a trembling finger. And I thought I was alone. You were the first to escape with proof. Thomas tapped the poster. Marshall says your photograph pieces and that handkerchief you kept, they match evidence from other cases. He's been waiting for something solid like this. Sarah stood abruptly, went to the window. Outside, snow erased the boundaries between earth and sky, much as it had that day. She'd wandered lost. What happens now? Marshall's sending deputies, wants statements from both of us. Thomas moved to stand behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. We don't have to face this alone. I'm not afraid of them anymore. The realization came with surprising force. I'm angry for all of us they hurt, for the ones who didn't survive. Good. His voice held quiet approval. Anger's better than fear, helps you stand your ground. She turned to face him. The town will know everything. About me, about why I was really here. Let them know. His eyes held hers steadily. Truths, nothing to be ashamed of. Even if it brings trouble to your door, to your ranch. Our ranch. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Unless you're still planning to leave once this is settled. Sarah looked around the kitchen, at Rebecca's recipe book open on the counter, at the herbs drying from rafters she'd dusted, at the proof of her belonging in every corner. No, she said softly. No, I don't think I am. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, like sun breaking through storm clouds. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and brushed a streak of flour from her cheek. The touch lingered, warm against her skin. Good, he said roughly, because I'm not. Sure, I remember how to run this place without you. The moment stretched, fragile as spider silk. Then the bread dough began to rise, demanding attention, and Sarah stepped back. But something had changed, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. They worked together through the morning, discussing the marshal's letter between daily tasks. Sarah found herself watching Thomas, the sure movement of his hands, the quiet strength in his bearing. He'd become her anchor in this storm, as solid as the mountains on the horizon. "We'll need to go to Cheyenne," he said over lunch. "Marshall wants to take our statements in person." "Together," he nodded. "Jim Parker's wife can watch the ranch for a few days. And I thought," he cleared his throat, "thought we might see about filing some paperwork while we're there, making your position here more official." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Official, if you want." His eyes met hers across the table. "Ranch needs a partner, not just a helper. Someone with a proper stake in its future." Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in clean white possibility. Sarah thought of the wanted poster, of all the women who'd lost their dreams to the Hendersons' cruelty, but she also thought of fence posts set deep in prairie, soil of recipe books passed down with love, of trust built slowly and surely as winter wheat taking root. "Yes," she said simply, "I want that very much." The journey to Cheyenne would have to wait. Winter came early to Wyoming territory that year, sending them scrambling to prepare the ranch for the harsh months ahead. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, one evening, adding to the growing list of supplies while Thomas calculated figures in the ledger. "Flour's low," she noted, comparing their stores to Rebecca's careful notes about winter needs. "And we'll need more salt for preserving. Add coffee." Thomas rubbed his tired eyes. "And anything else you think we've forgotten? Jim Parker's riding to town tomorrow, last chance before the passes get dicey." Sarah studied their list, written in her neat teacher's hand, alongside Thomas's rougher scrawl. The page told its own story, their different writings intertwined, planning a shared future neither had imagined months ago. "Leather for mending harness," she added, "and lamp oil. Rebecca's notes say the days get terribly short." She always did think ahead. Thomas's voice held a new tone when he spoke of Rebecca now, fond remembrance rather than raw grief. "Saved us more than once, her planning. I found her winter journal yesterday," Sarah admitted. "She wrote about the blizzard of '76, how you were trapped in the house for nearly a week. Worst storm I'd ever seen." He smiled slightly. "She read to me the whole time, wouldn't let me brood about the cattle we were sure to lose. Turned out they'd found shelter in the South Canyon, every last one." Sarah added books to the list, then hesitated. "Thomas, are you sure about this? About me staying through winter?" He set down his pencil, looked at her directly, having second. "Thoughts? No, but people will talk. A woman living here unmarried. People already talk. Let them." His hand covered hers on the list. "Unless you're worried about your reputation?" Sarah thought of the wanted poster, of the marshal's letter safely stored upstairs. "My reputation survived the Hendersons. It can survive this." His thumb brushed her knuckles, sending warmth up her arm. "Then what's troubling you? I don't want to be a burden. Winter's expensive and the ranch is doing better than it has in years." He tapped the ledger. "North pasture fence is sound. Gardens producing again. Kitchen's not wasting half what it used to. You've more than earned your place here." She turned her hand under his, laced their fingers together. The gesture felt as natural as breathing. "And what place is that, exactly?" Thomas's eyes darkened. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her up to face him. "Whatever place you want, Sarah Miller. I'm not offering charity or temporary shelter. I'm offering..." A log shifted in the stove, sending up sparks. They both started, breaking apart like guilty teenagers. Sarah smoothed her skirts, trying to slow her racing heart. "We should finish the list," she said softly. "Right. List." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Though there's something else we should discuss before winter sets in proper." Sarah returned to her chair, picked up her pencil. "Oh, been thinking about the empty classroom in town? School board still looking for a teacher." His voice was carefully casual. "Come spring, if you wanted, you'd let me teach again?" "Let you?" he snorted. "Sarah, I've seen you with Jim Parker's children when they visit, seen how much you miss it. Ranch needs you, yes, but maybe the town does too. Tears pricked her eyes. The parents might object. After everything, then they're fools. Besides, his smile held a hint of mischief. By spring, the Hendersons will be well and truly finished. Marshal Evans promised to keep us informed. Sarah added one final item to the list: chalk and slates. A promise to herself, to the future. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. The real me. Not just... She gestured vaguely at her work-worn hands, her simple dress. Thomas moved behind her chair, rested his hands on her shoulders. The weight felt like belonging, like home. Pretty sure I'm the one who should be grateful, he said quietly. Now finish that list before Jim Parker leaves without it. Winter's coming, and we've got a ranch to run. Sarah smiled, writing the last items with a steady hand. Outside, the wind sang of snow and long nights ahead. But here in the warm kitchen, planning their first winter together, she felt nothing but hope. The storm hit just before midnight, howling down from the mountains like a living thing. Sarah woke to the sound of shutters banging and Thomas's boots on the stairs. Cattle broke through the south fence, he called up to her. They'll freeze if we don't get them to the shelter grove. Sarah was already pulling on her warmest dress. I'll help. Too dangerous. I'm coming. She grabbed Rebecca's old wool coat from its peg. You'll need someone to hold the lantern while you work. He didn't argue, just handed her the old brass lantern when she reached the bottom of the stairs. Outside, the wind stole their breath, driving snow like needles against their faces. Sarah clutched the lantern high, its light barely penetrating. The swirling white. They found the cattle huddled against the wind, too frightened to move. Thomas worked his way around the herd, his voice carrying somehow above the storm as he urged them toward shelter. Sarah stayed at the edge, keeping the light steady, though her arms ached with the effort. Easy now, Thomas called to the frightened animals. Follow the light, that's it. They'd almost reached the grove when it happened. A gust caught Sarah's skirts, making her stumble. The lantern slipped from her numb fingers, hitting a rock with a crash of breaking glass. Darkness swallowed them whole. Thomas! Her voice was lost in the wind. Stay where you are! His command cut through the storm. Don't move! She heard him breathing, felt him near. Then his hand found hers, solid and warm despite the cold. Had to be Rebecca's lantern, he said. And somehow she heard the rueful smile in his voice. Probably. Telling us off right now for being out in this weather. The cattle will follow us. They're too scared to scatter now. His fingers tightened on hers. Trust me? Yes, the word came without hesitation. Then hold on. Grove's not far. They moved slowly through the storm, Thomas leading, Sarah close behind. The cattle followed their merged shadow, drawn by Thomas's steady voice and the promise of shelter. The grove, when they reached it, was almost supernaturally still. Ancient cottonwoods broke the wind's force, creating a space where snow fell, straight down instead of sideways. Thomas did a quick count of the herd, while Sarah caught her breath. All here, he reported, though we'll need to. Sarah, you're shaking. Just cold. Her teeth chattered traitorously. I'm fine. He pulled her close, sharing warmth. Shouldn't have let you come out. Shouldn't have tried to stop me. She pressed closer, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. We're partners. Remember? His laugh rumbled through his chest. Stubborn woman. Look who's talking. They stayed that way a moment longer than necessary, holding each other in the strange calm of the grove. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was rough with more than cold. Sarah, I know. She curled her fingers into his coat. Me too. The wind rose again, making the cottonwoods creak. Reluctantly, they pulled apart. Storm's getting worse, Thomas said. We need to get back. The broken lantern. Leave it. We'll find it come spring. They fought their way back to the house, leading each other through the darkness. Inside, they shed snow-covered clothes and huddled by the stove, sharing coffee and the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed words to understand each other. Might snow for days, Thomas said finally. Passes will be closed until spring. Sarah thought of the marshal's letter, the trip to Cheyenne that would have to wait. Found she didn't mind. "We have supplies enough? Thanks to your list, yes." He studied her over his coffee cup. No regrets about staying, she thought. Of the broken lantern lying in the snow, of Rebecca's recipes and warm coat, of a woman who'd loved this difficult, beautiful land enough to plan for its winters and plant gardens in its stubborn soil. "No regrets," she said softly. "This is where I belong." Thomas reached across the table, took her hand. Outside, the storm raged on, but here in the warm kitchen, Sarah felt nothing but peace. They'd faced the darkness together and found their way home. Everything else, the Hendersons, the marshal, the town's gossip, could wait for spring. For now there was just this, the sound of wind in the eaves, the warmth of joined hands, and the quiet certainty of having found at last the right path. Home. The storm lasted 3 days, bringing the deepest snow Sarah had ever seen. On the 4th morning, she found Thomas in the sitting room, holding an old quilt she'd discovered in the attic weeks ago. "Rebecca started this the winter we were married," he said, fingers tracing the intricate pattern. "Never did finish it, always said she'd get to it come spring." Sarah recognized the design from Rebecca's notebook, a variation on wedding ring, appropriate for a new bride's hopes. But the pieces had come apart over the years, the careful stitching surrendering to time and grief. "I've been mending it," she admitted. "In the evenings, while you do the ledgers. I hope you don't mind." He spread the quilt across his lap, finding her newer stitches among Rebecca's original work. "Different pattern here? Log cabin." Sarah touched the section she'd added. It seemed right, building something new while honoring what came before. Their eyes met over the quilting, and something shifted in the quiet morning air. Thomas laid his hand over hers, warm against the fabric they both held. "You've done that a lot," he said softly, "building new while honoring old. The ranch needed both." She turned her hand in his, their fingers interlacing naturally. "And so did we, I think." Outside, sunlight glittered on fresh snow, and the cattle they'd saved lowed contentedly in their sheltered grove. The storm had changed more than just the landscape, clearing away the last barriers between them as surely as it had erased the boundaries of earth and sky. "Got word from Jim Parker yesterday," Thomas said, still holding her hand. "Marshall's deputies reached Cheyenne before the storm. Henderson's tried to run, but—" he smiled slightly. "Seems they weren't as good at surviving winter as some folks." Sarah felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. "So it's over? Papers say they'll hang in spring." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "You'll never have to fear them again." She looked around the sitting room, at Rebecca's quilt in their joined hands, at the photographs on the mantel, at all the pieces of past and present that had slowly knit themselves into something whole. "I stopped fearing them weeks ago," she realized. "Somewhere between mending fences and surviving storms." Thomas tugged gently on their joined hands, drawing her closer. "Sarah Miller," he said roughly. "I've been trying to find the right words." "Then don't use words." She touched his cheek, feeling the slight tremor in his jaw. "Show me." His kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Sarah answered by drawing him closer, letting the quilt pool forgotten in their laps. When they finally parted, his eyes held a mix of wonder and certainty that made her heart ache. "I loved Rebecca," he said quietly. "Always will, as you should." Sarah smoothed the quilt between them. "Love doesn't end just because someone's gone. It changes, grows, makes room for more. Like your log cabin pattern, like life itself." She smiled. "Rebecca knew that, I think. She left so many notes. About the future, gardens to plant, recipes to try, quilts to finish. She believed in tomorrow, even knowing she might not see it." Thomas gathered her close again, his arms sure and strong around her. "And what do you believe in, Sarah Miller?" She thought of the schoolroom waiting in town, of the ranch's ledgers showing careful profit, of the herb gardens sleeping under snow. I believe in redemption, she said softly, in second chances, in love that's strong enough to heal old wounds and brave enough to risk new ones. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me? Yes. The word came easily, naturally, as breathing. Though the town will talk. Let them. We'll weather it together. Sarah picked up the quilt, studying the place where her stitches met Rebecca's. Like we weathered the storm, like we'll weather everything life sends. He smiled, though preferably with less midnight rescues of stubborn cattle. She laughed, settling into the circle of his arms. Outside, the winter sun climbed higher, making the snow-covered ranch glitter like diamonds. Inside, wrapped in a quilt that bridged past and present, Sarah and Thomas held each other, knowing they'd found something rare and precious, a love built on understanding, strengthened by shared purpose, and blessed by the gentle ghost of a woman who'd believed in tomorrow. Spring came to Wyoming territory like a shy bride, tentative at first, then blooming with unexpected glory. Sarah stood in Rebecca's garden, now cleared of winter debris, holding packets of seeds she'd ordered from back east. Rebecca marked these as her favorites, she told Thomas, who was turning the soil with practiced care. Sweet peas for fragrance, marigolds for color, herbs for healing. She'd have liked that you remembered. He paused, leaning on his spade. Though she might not recognize the place come summer. You've changed her design some, added to it, Sarah corrected gently. The herb section's larger because we're supplying the doctor now. And I thought, with the school starting next month, we might add a teaching garden, show the children how things grow. Thomas smiled at the enthusiasm in her voice. Speaking of the school, Jim Parker brought news from town. School boards approved. Your appointment, unanimously. Even after everything with the Hendersons? Especially after. Seems Marshal Evans wrote them quite a letter about your character. He crossed to her, brushed dirt from his hands. Though having the richest rancher in 3 territories speak for you probably didn't hurt. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Richest? Rancher? Well, he grinned, maybe not quite, but the winter contract with the army for our beef helped, as did someone's careful management of our stores. She touched the seed packets thoughtfully. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. The store in town's for sale. I thought perhaps with my teaching salary and the ranch's improved profits, a shop of our own. His eyes lit with interest. Selling what? Seeds, to start. Garden supplies, then maybe dry goods eventually. Rebecca's notes mention how hard it was getting proper supplies out here. Always thinking ahead, aren't you? He drew her close, not caring about the dirt on his clothes. Like those seeds, planning for summer before spring's properly started. Is that a yes? It's an I trust you, he kissed her softly. Though we should wait till after the wedding. Give the gossip something else to talk about first. Sarah laughed. As if they haven't been talking since winter. Mrs. Parker told me yesterday that half the town's taking bets on whether we'll wait for the preacher's next visit or ride to Cheyenne ourselves. And what did you tell her? That some things are worth waiting for. She stretched up to kiss his cheek, though I did mention you still owe me a trip to Cheyenne. For the marshal's paperwork, if nothing else. Thomas sobered slightly. Got word about that too. Trials set for next month. Marshal says they'll need your testimony. Sarah looked at the seeds in her hands. Future flowers and herbs. Promise. And healing all wrapped in paper packets. I'm ready. The Hendersons don't have power over me anymore. No, he agreed softly. You took that power back yourself. I just had the privilege of watching. They worked together through the morning, planting seeds in the freshly turned earth. Sarah found herself humming as they worked, an old hymn her mother had loved, about sowing in tears and reaping in joy. What are you thinking? Thomas asked, watching her pat soil over the last row. About growth, change. She sat back on her heels, surveying their work. When I first came here, I thought everything was ending, but it was really just beginning. He helped her to her feet, drew her close. Speaking of beginnings, I had a letter from my sister in Ohio. Says she's sending a wedding gift early, a proper silk dress if you want it. Silk? For a ranch wedding? For whatever kind of wedding you want. His voice turned serious. You've given up enough dreams, Sarah. Let me give you this one back. She thought of the young woman who'd stepped off the train in Copper Creek, full of hopes that had seemed shattered beyond repair. Thought of all the paths that had led from that moment to this one. Dreams change, she said softly. The ones I have now are better than the ones I lost. Around them, the garden waited for summer, seeds sleeping in dark soil. Soon there would be weddings and trials, new stores and schoolrooms, a future unfolding like petals after rain. But for now, there was just this, the warmth of spring sun, the promise of growing things, and love as deep as the good earth beneath their feet. The Cheyenne courthouse stood solid against the May sky, its red brick walls holding both justice and memory. Sarah gripped Thomas's arm as they climbed the steps, her other hand touching the empty space at her throat where her mother's locket had once rested. You don't have to look at them, Thomas reminded her softly. Just tell your story. Marshal Evans met them at the door, his weathered face grave. Miss Miller, Mr. Crawford, we found something during the arrest that belongs to you. He pressed a familiar weight into Sarah's palm, her mother's locket, tarnished but intact. The clasp was broken, but when she worked it open, the photograph inside remained undamaged. They had it all this time, she whispered. Kept it like a trophy. Found a whole collection, the marshal said grimly. Lockets, rings, letters, memories they stole from every woman they robbed. Judge is going to want to hear about that. Inside the courtroom, Sarah's steps faltered at the sight of the Hendersons. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by prison clothes and iron shackles. Mary's calculating smile was gone, replaced by a fear she couldn't quite hide. James wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Courage, Thomas murmured, covering her hand on his arm with his own. Sarah straightened her spine, remembering the woman who'd walked away from their cruelty, who'd rebuilt her life piece by piece. The Hendersons had no power here. Her testimony came clear and strong, each word measured like grain for winter storage. She told of the false letters, the theft, the threats, told of other women's stories, pieced together from evidence the marshal had gathered, told of lives disrupted and dreams delayed, but never quite destroyed. And this locket, the prosecutor asked, it belonged to your mother? Yes. Sarah held it carefully, one of the few things I had left of her. They took it knowing it was precious beyond its worth in silver. Objection, the Hendersons' lawyer drawled. The witness is editorializing. Overruled. The judge's eyes were sharp. Continue, Miss Miller. Sarah looked directly at Mary Henderson for the first time. They didn't just steal valuables. They stole trust, hope, the belief that people could be kind without wanting something in return. She touched the locket. But they didn't steal our strength, and they couldn't stop spring from coming. Mary flinched. James stared at his manacled hands. After, on the courthouse steps, Marshal Evans shook their hands. Fine testimony, though I suspect the evidence of their other crimes would have hanged them anyway. What happens to the other items they stole? Sarah asked. We'll try to return what we can. Some victims have already been found. Others, he sighed. Well, some wounds don't heal clean. But they do heal, Sarah said softly, watching Thomas. Speak with their lawyer across the square. The marshal studied her thoughtfully. You're getting married, I hear. Next month, when the wild roses bloom, she smiled. Life goes on, Marshal. That's the best revenge of all. Later, in their hotel room, Thomas helped her repair the locket's chain. His hands were steady with the tiny tools, though his voice was rough with emotion. Wish I could have been there, he said, when they first hurt you. You were. Sarah touched his cheek. In all the ways that mattered most. You showed me that trust was still possible, that love could be stronger than fear. He closed the repaired clasp carefully around her neck, let his hands linger on her shoulders. You did that yourself. I just watched and admired. And loved me. And loved you. He turned her to face him, though God knows I fought against it at first. Thought my heart was finished with such things. Sarah touched the locket, whole, again at her throat. Hearts are stronger than we think. They can survive almost anything. Even Henderson's? Even them. She stepped into his embrace. They'll hang tomorrow, and we'll go home. Plant our garden, plan our wedding, build our future. Living well really is the best revenge. Through the hotel window, they could see the prison where the Hendersons waited for morning. But its shadows couldn't reach them here. They had survived. Winter's storms and spring's trials. Tomorrow would bring justice, and after that, a lifetime of seasons to share. The morning after the Hendersons' execution dawned clear and cool. Sarah found Thomas in the hotel's sitting room, studying papers spread across a small table. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, touching his shoulder. "Had some things to finish." He covered her hand with his. "Come sit. There's something we need to discuss." The papers were legal documents, she realized. The ranch's deed and other official forms she didn't recognize. Thomas pushed one across. To her. "Had our lawyer draw these up yesterday, partnership papers." He met her eyes steadily. "Want to do this properly before the wedding. Make you full owner alongside me." Sarah stared at the document, her vision blurring. "Thomas, the ranch is your life's work, yours and Rebecca's. I can't—" "You already have." He pulled out the ranch's ledger. "Look at the figures. Really look. We've doubled our profits since autumn, the army contract, the new garden supplies business, the school position. Those were your ideas. Your work. Our work," she corrected softly. "Exactly." He took her hand. "I'm not offering charity, Sarah. I'm offering what you've already earned, what you deserve." She traced the deed's elaborate script with her free hand. "Does it bother you? Changing what you and Rebecca built?" "Rebecca knew something I forgot. After she died." He smiled slightly. "That love grows best when it's shared. The ranch was never meant for solitude." Sarah thought of Rebecca's recipe book, her garden plans, her careful notes about the future. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." "So." Thomas pushed a pen toward her. "Partners." She picked up the pen but hesitated. "The town already thinks what it thinks." He squeezed her hand. "And soon they'll be too busy commenting on your teaching methods to worry about anything else." Sarah laughed, remembering the school board's lengthy suggestions about curriculum. "They're still arguing about whether grammar or arithmetic should come first in the day. And the store, Mrs. Parker's, already offered to help run it when I'm teaching." Sarah smiled. "Says it'll give her an excuse to escape her mother-in-law's visits." Thomas gathered the papers carefully. "That's settled then. We'll file these today, then head home. Unless you'd rather stay in town." His voice was carefully neutral. "Might be easier with the school and store. Could sell the ranch, buy a house here." "Thomas Crawford." Sarah took his face between her hands. "That ranch is our home. I'm not giving up one dream to chase another." The tension left his shoulders. "Even if it means rising before dawn. Hard work, endless repairs, winter storms." Even then, she kissed him softly. "Besides, how would the children learn about growing things without Rebecca's garden?" He pulled her close, his voice rough. "God, I love you." "I should hope so." She smiled against his shoulder. "You're about to make me your business partner." Later, watching Thomas file the papers at the courthouse, Sarah touched her mother's locket. So much had changed since she'd first stepped off that train in Copper Creek. The naive young woman would hardly recognize the teacher, gardener, and rancher she'd become. The clerk handed Thomas the recorded documents with a flourish. "Congratulations, Mr. Crawford, Miss Miller. Or should I say, Mrs. Crawford-to-be. Sarah Miller Crawford," she corrected gently. "Keeping both names, like the ranch, honoring old, while building new." Thomas tucked the papers safely away. "Ready to go home?" Home. Such a simple word for such a profound truth. Sarah thought of the ranch waiting for them, the garden full of sprouting seeds, the repaired fences standing strong, the kitchen where Rebecca's recipes now mingled with her own. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." They rode out of Cheyenne. As the sun climbed high, the future spreading before them like the Wyoming prairie, vast, challenging, and full of possibility. The ranch deed in Thomas's saddlebag represented more than legal ownership. It was a promise, a commitment to the life they'd build together. Spring winds carried the scent of wild roses, blooming early this year. Sarah smiled, remembering their wedding plans. Some things, it seemed, couldn't wait for summer after all. They married in Rebecca's garden on a perfect May morning, wild roses blooming weeks early, as if nature itself blessed their union. Sarah wore her new silk dress, but with practical boots hidden beneath, a compromise that made Thomas laugh when she confessed it. "Practical and beautiful," he whispered as she joined him before the preacher. "Like everything else about you." The wedding bands were simple gold, carried on a silk cushion by Jim Parker's youngest daughter. Sarah's was new, but Thomas wore his original ring, newly polished and resized. Some traditions they'd agreed were worth keeping. Not quite traditional having the garden as witness, the preacher had worried when they'd suggested it. But Sarah had stood firm. "The garden represents everything we're building together. What better place to make our vows?" Now, surrounded by blooming herbs and early flowers, with the ranch spreading green and prosperous around them, Sarah knew they'd chosen rightly. Rebecca's spirit seemed to bless them through every flowering plant, every careful design they'd maintained while adding their own touches. The town had turned out in force, curiosity finally overcoming gossip. They watched as Sarah and Thomas exchanged rings and vows, saw how the couple's hands trembled with joy as they pledged their lives to each other. "With this ring," Thomas's voice was rough with emotion, "I thee wed. All that I am, all that I have I share with you." Sarah's answering vows were steady, though tears brightened her eyes. "With this ring, I thee wed. All that I am, all that I have, I share with you." The preacher's words of blessing merged with the spring wind, carrying the scent of sage and wild roses. When Thomas kissed his bride, the gathered crowd's approval rang across the prairie. The celebration lasted well into evening. Tables groaned with food, made from Rebecca's recipes and Sarah's adaptations. Children played among the garden beds, carefully avoiding the newly planted sections. Marshal Evans, who'd ridden from Cheyenne for the occasion, danced with every willing lady and pronounced the ranch's transformation nothing short of miraculous. "Though not as miraculous as you two finding each other," he told Sarah during their dance. "Some might call it chance, but I call it providence." Sarah watched Thomas dancing with Jim Parker's wife, his smile easier than she'd ever seen it. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead us exactly where we need to be." As sunset painted the sky gold, their guests departed with well wishes and knowing smiles. Sarah and Thomas stood in their garden, wedding rings catching the last light. "Happy?" Thomas asked softly. Sarah touched her ring, then his. "Complete," she corrected. "Like we've finished a circle neither of us knew we were drawing." He drew her close. "Rebecca would have loved you, you know. Would have seen what I see, how you make everything around you bloom. I think she does see." Sarah gestured at the thriving garden, the prosperous ranch, the future they'd built from past sorrow. "She left us a foundation. We're just building on it." Later, in the quiet of their home, Sarah added her own note to Rebecca's recipe book. "Made your sweet roll recipe for our wedding feast. The garden you planted gave us roses weeks early. Thank you for leaving so much love here for us to find." "Writing to Rebecca?" Thomas asked from the doorway. "Thanking her," Sarah corrected, "for everything she left us, everything she taught us about love." He crossed to her, taking her hand so their rings caught the lamplight together. "And what did she teach us?" "That love grows," Sarah said softly. "That it can survive winter and storm, bloom again in new ways. That sometimes the best gardens grow in soil that's known both loss and joy." Outside, the evening wind carried the scent of wild roses and sage, of growing things and future promise. Inside, two rings gleamed in the lamplight, symbols of a love that had learned to honor the past while embracing tomorrow. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching a young woman step down from the afternoon stage. She clutched a carpetbag and a letter, her eyes wide with hope and uncertainty, so like Sarah's own arrival that the memory caught in her throat. "That's her?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside his wife. Sarah nodded. "Mary Beth Williams answered our advertisement for a shop assistant." She touched the locket at her throat. "She's running from something. I can see it in her eyes. Like someone else I once knew." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Think we should tell her about the room we're offering? Above the store?" "Not yet. Let's let her find her feet first." Sarah smiled, "Though I did make up Rebecca's spare quilt for the bed, just in case." The town had grown over the past year. Sarah's store, selling everything from garden seeds to school supplies, had flourished under Mrs. Parker's capable management. The school now boasted 23 students, including 3 from neighboring ranches who boarded in town. But it was the ranch that had transformed the most. The summer garden produced enough to supply both their store and the doctor's office. The army had renewed their beef contract at an even better price, and the newfangled photograph they'd had taken last week showed everything they'd built together. Sarah and Thomas on the porch, the thriving garden behind them, Rebecca's recipe. Book open on Sarah's lap as she planned the next season's plantings. "Should we go welcome her?" Thomas asked, watching Mary Beth struggle with her bag. Sarah thought of that long-ago day when she'd arrived lost and afraid, thought of all the paths that had led from that moment to this one. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's show her that sometimes the hardest journeys lead us home." They crossed the street together, their shadows merging in the afternoon light. Behind them, wild roses bloomed in Rebecca's garden, their fragrance carrying on the warm spring wind, a reminder that love, like flowers, could bloom again and again, each season bringing new beauty to those with courage enough to plant seeds, in soil that had known both tears and joy. And somewhere, Sarah thought, Rebecca was smiling, knowing her garden grew on in careful hands, tended by those who understood that the sweetest blooms often grew from the deepest roots of love.